board of the Science Club. I love doing it. And I want to start with a few thank yous. How's that sound? Good? Okay. So first, we always start with this. Thank you, Angeline and the Belfry and the staff of the Belfry for having us here, feeding us, taking care of us. You know, this place serves a lot of purposes. We come here for a lot of different reasons. We come here to learn. We come here to dance. We come here to eat and drink, and it's part of Sisters that I just think is really important. So thank you, Angeline. I'm going to thank the board. If you hold your applause, just board members, as I call your name, stand up or wave or something like that so that people see you. So our president, David Durham, is over here. Donnie Hutzinger is back there because he is also our videographer. If you go on our website, sisterscienceclub.org, you can see every past lecture for this year on there in video. So if you missed any, it's a great way to catch up on it. Larry Price is here somewhere. I saw him. There he is, back in the corner. I don't think Joe Sherry is here, but Joe and Larry and I work together to vet speakers for these frontier in science presentations, and we really enjoy doing that. And I hope you enjoy the learning about beavers tonight. Dave Johnson, Gail Todd, Jocelyn Blevins. Thank you to the board. And I think our roving school ambassador for tonight is Rima Gibbett, and she's sitting in the back there. Hi, Rima. Peyton Meyer does the sound for us. Dana Greenblatt does just about everything, including remind me about all of the people that I need to thank. And so, thank you, Dana. It's very helpful, and we really appreciate your work. Dana will also be at the front door. Each of you should have gotten a piece of paper when you came in. I hope you've got that, because I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. I also want to thank somebody else. Rob Corrigan has stood up here doing what I'm doing right now so many times. The maestro of ceremonies has introduced speakers. That's how I first met him, was coming to a science club, and I just want to thank you for all that work, Rob. He's not even on the board. He does it out of love of community and science, and so thanks, Rob. So that piece of paper you got, if you point your phone, your camera at the QR code, it will take you to a registration page for a fundraising event that we're holding this next Sunday at 2 o'clock. Happy hour starts at 2. Might be a little early for happy hour for some, but it's 5 o'clock somewhere, right? And we'll wrap it up by 5. And you're going to have a chance to hear about the really wonderful things that our dollars do in the science community at Sisters School District. So I hope you can be there, but the reason I would ask you to register if you will be there is we want to be able to have food and drink for you, and we have no idea how many people are coming. So there's no charge. It takes you to an Eventbrite website where you can just register. So we'll know you're planning to be there. We really appreciate that. So what's the state animal of Oregon? Anybody know? Well, that's true. It is the beaver. Oh, wait. You also could have said one of 5 other animals, and you would have been right. Did you know that Oregon has 6 state animals? Anybody know what the other 5 are? Well, I'm going to tell you. Chinook salmon, okay. Western meadowlark, the Oregon swallowtail, Dungeness crab, and the Oregon triton, which is, I think you can see them in tide pools. Anybody know the answer to that? Rob's nodding. Yeah. 6 state animals. Did you know that we have a state steak? Does anybody know what that is? It's the T-bone, and it was introduced just last year by the Oregon Cattle Women Association. They thought the T-bone was perfect because it's a big steak with a line right down the middle, representing the east side and the west side of the state. So I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Maureen Thompson. She is the program manager of Beaver Works, Oregon, a program of Think Wild in Bend, and she lives in Bend. She was telling me just a minute ago that she feels so lucky because she can walk to work. She's built a diverse career in ecology, working with government agencies, nonprofits, and consultancies across the U.S. and internationally. She holds a BS from the Evergreen State College and an MS from Oklahoma State University and a PhD from the University of New South Wales, Sydney. And she got that PhD during the pandemic. And she was also telling me that that was quite unfortunate to be down in Australia and not be able to travel more than 5 kilometers from home, because those were the restrictions that were in place. For over 15 years, Maureen has worked at the intersection of science, policy, and public engagement, helping to bridge the gap between research and real-world conservation. More than anything, she loves sharing her passion for beavers and their remarkable ecological impact. So let's welcome Maureen to the stage.
I'll just take this with me. Well, thank you everyone so much for spending Earth Day with me. I love talking about beavers and human-beaver coexistence, and so that is my plan for today, is to talk about sort of the history of humans and beavers, specifically in Oregon, talk about some opportunities on the horizon, some changes to Oregon law, and what coexistence with beavers could look like in the future, and ways that you can get involved locally. So I work for Think Wild, which is a conservation center located in Bend. We serve 5 counties in central and eastern Oregon through education, conservation, and rehabilitation. So a lot of people become familiar with Think Wild through our wildlife hotline and our wildlife hospital. But a lot of our programs related to education, like wildlife services, Beaver Works, really try to reduce the number of human-wildlife conflicts and the patients that we have in the hospital. We would love it if there were no patients in the wildlife hospital. And so that's really what we work to do in supporting beavers and habitat for many species that live here locally. So first thing I think we can all agree about beavers is they are extremely cute. Some other, beaver biology that we could start with is that they're herbivores, so they just eat plant material. They live everywhere from boreal Canada to northern Florida and Baja, Mexico, so they eat a lot of different plants across that range, but they just eat plants. So they eat willows, cottonwoods, aspens are our favorite. Let's see. In this video, see if it'll play. Oh, sorry, not getting the video. It's a video of a beaver eating grass. This is at Shevlin Park in Bend. And so you can hear music from a nearby wedding that this beaver was an unanticipated guest at, mowing down, having some delicious sedges. So beavers have all of these really cool adaptations for this semi-aquatic life. They breathe air, they have to breathe every 15 minutes so they can dive and hold their breath for a long time. But they have this, rudder-like tail, these webbed hind feet, these waterproofing oil glands, so you'll see them a lot of times rubbing oil on themselves. Oh, it's fine. And that's something that they do to waterproof their fur, so that's something that really helps them to be so slick and spend so much of their lives in the water. They have a cloaca, which means just like one hole for everything, which is really unusual for a mammal, which means it's also really hard to tell beavers apart, the sexes apart. And so the best way to tell them apart is actually by smell. Female beavers have this waterproofing oil that smells like cheese, and males smell like motor oil. And so even in a zoo situation, that is the best way to tell beavers apart. And it's really hard to tell even individuals apart. So some interesting research out of Norway recently, we learned that beaver tails are like a human thumbprint, so they have a unique pattern on all of their tails. Which was just research that was published last year. So there's really cool research coming out all the time relating to beavers. Beavers, in addition to being one of the 6 state animals, are the largest rodents in North America. And so the second largest rodent in North America, does anyone know? Porcupines? So yeah, porcupines are second, and beavers are second in the world to capybaras. So beavers live in close-knit family groups. I showed this picture to some 7th graders who immediately identified that these beavers were all eating a burrito, and I can't unsee it. But they really do spend a lot of time with their family. So they'll live in family groups with the parents, the kids, which are the babies, sometimes last year's kids, which can stick around for 1 to 2 years, learning all the ways of working together with the family, how to build and maintain your dams. So they really offer like tutelage to their offspring before they send them off on their own. They usually breed during the winter and then have babies in the spring, so their gestation period is around 100 to 110 days. So actually this month might be the time of year that nearly 2-year-old kids are sort of getting the cold shoulder from their parents and getting led off to make room for the new kids that probably would be born in April, May, or June. And so beavers do not live in the dam, but they build lodges and they live in dens and build dens. But they do build the dam to sort of create their home environment that they maintain. So they can maintain an area of 1/2 mile to 1 mile of stream. And so it really is a lot of work for them, and that's part of why they have to cooperate together so much as a family. Another cool thing about beavers is that a few weeks before the female gives birth, she might be hanging out in the lodge and looking around and thinking, we're gonna need some more room in here, and she will start excavating away the walls about 30 extra centimeters to make room for the new family members. And so we have another video, I'm not sure if it will work. We can try. Sorry, we'll have to save it for the end. But it's beavers wrestling and playing because animal play teaches important skills to all animals, but beavers learn communication, coordination, empathy, how to navigate their environment, a lot of things that are really important for developing their physical abilities and going off to maintain their own home sites. Oh, it's fine. Oh, amazing. I just got some questions about beaver noises. Do they make noise? And they certainly do. They make a lot of whimpering and cooing and extremely cute noises that maybe we will hear with this video. But yeah, beavers are famous for being the rising tide that lifts all boats as ecosystem engineers, but really they are doing it for their own reasons. to build and maintain a safe home, because beavers are much more competitive against predators when they are in water. They need at least 3 feet of water to successfully just feel safe in an environment, and so that's why they do a lot of dam building. So this again is a video from Shetland Park. We have a coyote and a beaver having a little tete-a-tete. The coyote, it looks like, is thinking about crossing on this dam and having second thoughts as the beaver approaches. And yeah, it looks like it really is successful. That tail slap is effective at scaring off predators, because beavers want to be, safe in an interaction like this. They also want to have access to the food they need to build and eat. And so being able to pond up areas makes it so that way that cottonwood gallery, those aspens are that much closer to the water. And this makes sense when you look at the body of a beaver. They have very short limbs. It is a lot easier for them to get that wood into the water and have it go downstream with them than for them to be schlepping all of this wood across dry land where they are at risk against predators. Because of course on land they are very juicy, they're plump, they have short limbs, anything that eats meat would want to get them. And you can see that this interaction went a lot better when the beaver was in the water. So as ecosystem engineers, beavers, initiate these positive biological feedback loops wherein the beaver builds the dams and channels. Those dams and channels are holding water, which then allow vegetation to grow. That vegetation, becomes wood that beavers can use to eat and to build more dams, and like around and around it goes. They get this name busy beavers for a reason. They're just constantly accelerating recovery and complexity in ecosystems. And so they really do have an outsized impact on the environment where they live. It's no surprise that they are the OSU mascot, they are on the Oregon state flag, they are our state mammal, because they really are important to the lands and life in Oregon. And so another name beavers sometimes get is, they get called this ecological Swiss Army knife, because they, have all of these impacts on other ecological interactions. And so starting with water quality, beaver ponds can affect things like temperature, pH, turbidity, so like suspended sediment. They also have a lot of impacts on stream hydraulics, so changing the timing and intensity of flood and stream flow. They influence channel morphology, so the shape of the stream by, of course, building these canals and moving soil around. And because of all these effects, they get this name as the ecological Swiss Army knife, because they address so many of these different issues that are of interest to humans: flooding, erosion, carbon storage. And so we'll go into a little bit more depth in the next few slides about these ecosystem interactions, starting with water quality. So maybe you've heard wetlands referred to as the kidneys of the landscape, because they really are important in filtering water. And wetlands do this through settling out particles in slower moving water and through chemical transformations that remove nitrogen. So nitrogen in suspended sediment aren't inherently bad, but excessive amounts can cause algal blooms, and excessive sediment can cover up things like spawning habitat. And so beaver ponds really help these stay at healthy levels, and basically they just act like water filters. And we have incredible evidence of this from Gresham, Oregon, at a stormwater filtration plant where we already were trying, to remove sediments and pesticides and heavy metals out of the water. And so, of course, we were already measuring how effective this water treatment facility was when beavers moved in. And of course, initially the facility managers were like, this is a heavily controlled environment, we're gonna get these beavers out of here. And then someone intervened and said, well, we've already been measuring, how good we are at, reducing the temperatures, removing sediments and pesticides. Let's do a before and after study of before the beavers moved in and after the beavers moved in. And so we can see that, the gray is with no beaver dams, and the orange is with beaver dams. And we were just so much more effective at achieving our own aims, which was purifying the water with beavers in there, and so they were allowed to stay.
And so another effect of slowing down water and spreading it out across the valley is an increase in filtration in groundwater. Wait, is this still working?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And raising the groundwater table. So we can kind of see what that looks like over time. A lot of the impacts of having beavers in the environment take time to really, show these impacts. But since beavers dig canals so they can easily travel out from their main pond and reach all of these water sources, they're spreading nutrients, they're spreading water across the floodplain, and this floodplain connectivity really expands the area where riparian plants can live and increases riparian habitat, which can support more wildlife than just in a non-beaver managed stream where there's just like really a narrow strip of riparian plants before you swiftly transition to sort of open and upland areas. And if we kind of take those same frames and shift our focus from the water to the soil, we can see how that beaver ponds create this opportunity for sediment to drop out of the water column. And over time, that really builds up and can raise the valley bottom floor, and again, increase that fertile riparian surface area. So it's just, you're getting all of these soils from within the watershed, full of native plant seeds from within that area that have an opportunity to grow, rather than just being rushed out to the ocean. And so this also allows all these sediments to trap in place behind the pond, and so they're leaving downstream cobble and gravel beds open that play other roles in the ecosystem. And this is some of the historic limitations on where humans can live and where we can have productive agriculture is the soil loss. And so having beavers on the landscape is a great way to build soil health and soil biodiversity. And if you're thinking about carbon being stored in the environment, you might immediately think of trees because they have this visible above ground biomass. But when you look at a wetland, you don't see that same storage. But actually, wetlands are so important to carbon storage. So one of the defining factors of wetlands is soil that has gone anaerobic. So oxygen is used, so microbes have to use other chemistry to break down carbon, and those other methods are much slower. And the result is just a lot of fixed carbon hanging out underground. And so this really illustrates the importance of wetlands, and specifically wetland soils, to global carbon storage. They store more carbon than any other type of ecosystem. And because of all these large landscape scale changes that beavers can have on the environment, sometimes their agents of change at small scales get overlooked, but really they create all of these diverse conditions. So this gift of habitat complexity at multiple scales. So it's across time and across space. So basically they create microhabitats, so there's privacy. There's basically just the Goldilocks temperature for so many different species, warmer water, colder waters, faster waters, slower waters, back eddies, emergent vegetation, fast-moving vegetation, coarse woody debris. There's places for invertebrates to grow up, which means, more prey for other species. There's places to bask, if you're a frog. There's potential to disperse if you're a salamander. There's dead standing wood if you're a woodpecker. There's just really something for everyone. And so these top two pictures are pictures from beaver-managed habitat. And the bottom two pictures are from human-managed habitat, where you can see that really, we design human ponds to be like a bathtub. There's just one, water-holding tank, and then we have some riparian plants, and really a swift transition after, sometimes really tall invasive species along that bank to upland plants. And so there just really is not a ton of space, and most animals need riparian habitat for a lot of their life phases. And so in Oregon, we have the Oregon Conservation Strategy, which is a framework for conservation and recovery of a lot of our ecosystems and our species. And so in a review of the relationship between the 294 species of greatest conservation need in Oregon and beaver-managed habitat, we found that up to 74% of these species are potentially benefit from beaver-managed habitat. And this is just so exciting because there's really never, a way that can uplift 10 or 20 or 30% of all these different species. especially when you look at some of the different life forms we have on screen. So there's like fish, there's upland birds, there's passerines, there's woodpeckers, there's bats, there's turtles, species with such different life cycles. And there really is no other one thing or one action that could uplift so many species in its wake, and we're just so lucky to have beavers. And so if we look at that across taxa, and so there's 7 different taxonomic groups included in the Oregon Conservation Strategy, different numbers of each, but the main thing I want to impart with this plot is that there is a lot of green. So these benefits to species in Oregon are not restricted to, just fish or just birds. It's really across all taxa. And we look at these benefits across the ecoregions. So Oregon has 9 ecoregions, 8 land-based ones. We actually see these benefits skew even higher. So you see a lot of green in each pie chart mapped on an ecoregion. And this is because a lot of species that have larger ranges, so they appear in multiple ecoregions, have more research behind them. And that research indicates that they benefit from beaver-modified habitat. And actually that relationship is not stronger anywhere than in the East Cascades, where fully 90% of the resident species stand to benefit from beaver-modified habitat, which is just, so exciting. I also plotted when all of these research papers relating beavers to Oregon conservation strategies were published, and so that's what this plot on the left is. And you can see that some of this evidence, relating to the benefits of beavers on the landscape is older than 1950, but a ton of this research has been published since the first Oregon Conservation Strategy was written in 2006, and a lot of it has come out since the last revision, which is in 2016. So yeah, we're just learning so much about beavers. It's really such an exciting time. Another way to kind of look at where the opportunities are in this heat map on the right, you can see the top row is state-sensitive species, and then the bottom row is federally threatened and endangered species. So it's basically, from you go top to bottom, it's more threat level, more imperiled. And the number inside each box is the percentage of species in that category. So if we look at just the benefits and benefits likely categories for state sensitive, we can see it's like 81% of those species are likely to benefit. And so that's just such an exciting alignment of interest. Like, it's so rare to see benefits come from one potential management action. And to benefit 81 species before they become more imperiled is just such a great opportunity. Similarly, if we look at the bottom to the federally threatened and endangered species, 44% of those species are likely to benefit from increased beaver-managed habitat, which again, this is species on the brink. It's an expensive obligation for the state to uphold to these federal standards, is recovering and conserving these species. And so the benefits of beaver-modified habitat are just like so exciting. They're not limited to any taxa, any locale, or any climate type. And so if we know, so many of these great benefits about beavers, then why is this a common sight for us? This is kind of a common sight for me. I'll see a stream that looks like this. It's mostly dry. There's just sort of a green sheen. There's no riparian vegetation. There's sort of a swift transition to dry, bare soil and invasive grasses. It's just a single channeled stream. It's maybe 15 feet below the valley bottom floor. It doesn't look amazing. And so if this is a common sight for any of you, this really is just a reflection of the time that we were born, because it is a historical anomaly. And so to understand kind of why our streams look like this, we have to look a few centuries back. Because before the gold rush, there was the beaver rush. So beavers were once so abundant that they shaped the landscape and made much of Oregon habitable. Their work created lush wetlands and rich soils and productive meadows that later supported farming and livestock for a lot of early settlers. But beaver furs exploring beaver furs, seeking out beaver furs, really drove early exploration of North America, and unregulated trapping in the 1800s led to their near extinction by the 1820s. So that's really, over 200 years ago. And so the Oregon legislature banned beaver trapping starting in 1899 as a result of kind of what they had already noticed about these beaver declines. So North American beaver populations are, really roughly estimated to be about 400 million, and they since reduced down to around 100,000. And so they've rebounded some since then, but beaver-modified landscape really influenced the placement of early settlements and really influenced, human biogeography. In talking before this presentation, a lot of people mentioned specific town names that were, in reference to the beavers that really made that an established human settlement. And so, in the absence of beavers and with increased human populations, some of the ecosystem functions that beavers once supported have now disappeared. And we're lucky, a lot of people, when they came here, they documented what they saw, which was a lot of wetlands, wet meadows, stirrup high grasses, and beavers in abundance. There's just so many local accounts from the Deschutes and the Crooked Rivers sharing, stories of beaver abundance. And so we can see that in the time since we've lost a lot of these beavers, what the effects have been. So we can see kind of what this looks like on the left. There's a lot of beaver dams. We have this wide wet meadow, this high water table, a lot of braided complex streams. Then we can see by 1900, it's a bit drier. It's probably a little bit of a more straightened stream to accommodate for human development, farming and houses along the stream. A little bit drier. And then we can see something, that looks common today. It's really eroded, really straightened, very dry water table, no real active side channels, just deeply inside streams that are immediately surrounded by sort of crusty brown banks. And so if we've acknowledged that beavers on the landscape support human health and ecosystem resilience, but this feedback loop isn't active, how do we jumpstart it? What does it take to actively reverse this trend? Well, for a lot of people, their first thought is relocation. There have been a lot of exciting stories in the last 15 or so years about beaver relocation, but trapping and rehoming beavers is actually a practice over a century old. Starting in the early 1900s, beavers were relocated from various states on the East Coast, and then this picture here is from the Ochocos in 1936, people trapping and relocating beavers. A lot of people have heard of this story, Operation Beaver Drop. It's since been turned into a children's book, where after World War II, in Idaho, they were establishing the Frank Church Roadless Wilderness area, and they thought beavers returning to this area would make a really great addition. They also knew that horses and beavers really didn't get along, and they had these parachutes left over from World War II, and they thought, maybe we should give that a go. So they put beavers in boxes that popped open on impact and dropped a lot of beavers into this wilderness area, where some of them have survived, to create a lot of amazing habitat that we still have today. And so while there is evidence that translocations can be advantageous, they are not often successful. So a lot of times when you hear about a beaver success story, it will be the 5th or the 10th time they've attempted to take beavers to that area. And a lot of people are okay with that math. They think we're taking a problem beaver from a place where it would be killed and giving it at least a chance at life somewhere else. But the reality is a lot of these beavers, just if they don't live somewhere, they don't live there for a reason. So there are other limitations to their survival. So when they're dropped off at this place, they might not have the deep water, the food that they need to survive. There are, of course, a lot of predators. And beavers can just continue walking until they find what they need. So very often when you're relocating them to an area where they would be welcome, they just end up showing up somewhere else where they are once again unwelcome.
And so there are really a lot of limitations, with this high mortality, long movement after release. They just kind of have a slim chance of survival. And also, we've already been relocating beavers in this country for 120 years, and this is something we still see. This is really not a new idea, it's a pendulum swing. This is still quite a common sight for us. We have beavers in the Deschutes River, we have beavers in the Crooked River, we have beavers in the John Day River, so if they're not getting to all of these places we would like them, there's something else going on. And so, I don't need to tell anyone here that Central and Eastern Oregon landscapes are heavily impacted by environmental issues, not the least of which is fire, which threatens habitat for fish and wildlife, and also for humans. And so beavers have been getting a lot of attention in recent years for their role in mitigating the impacts of wildfires. So this paper, Smokey the Beaver, was published in 2020, and they investigated basically fire recovery in areas that had and did not have beaver across the western US, and found, not by some margin of error, but in every case where it was beaver-managed habitat, they survived through wildfires. And so this research helped influence Oregon law with the passage of HB 3464, the Beaver Believer Bill, which became law last year. And this might be too blurry to read, but I want to read it out loud because it's just really exciting to see this language not in some environmental essay, but in Oregon law, because this now Oregon law says, whereas a warming climate is increasing the frequency of droughts and wildfires, and whereas beavers have a significant role in increasing the quantity and quality of water on a landscape and decreasing the risks of wildfire, and therefore act as a buffer against climate extremes. Whereas the beaver is a keystone species that serves as nature's engineer, and beaver habitat has the ability to provide refugia, stimulate the recovery of other species, and foster resilience on the landscape impacted by climate change. So the inclusion of this language is just really indicative of how important watershed recovery is in Oregon right now, and just how much we have lost by excluding beavers from the story for so long. And so it really reflects our evolving understanding of beavers as a keystone species and emphasizes the importance of coexistence. So it does a couple of things. It removes a predatory animal designation of beavers. So beavers were considered an agricultural pest up until 2024. They were not considered a wildlife species, and they were not managed as so. And so this does a few things. It promotes the use of non-lethal management tools. So Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife is now tasked with managing beavers in private lands. And so they basically have made it so that way, Plan A for private landholders is to try coexisting with beavers. Plan B is to request a kill permit. Because prior to 2024, if you wanted to kill a beaver on private property, you could just do that. They were an agricultural pest. And so now it basically creates a tracking system to where we can understand by a loose proxy where these conflicts are happening, and thereby understand where beaver populations are kind of ebbing and flowing across the landscape. And so now that we've kind of talked about this shifting legal framework in Oregon, I want to share this concept of the Overton window, because it's a concept in political theory that describes the range of ideas and policies that are considered acceptable and mainstream at any given time. And understanding the Overton window helps explain how certain policies or ideas can shift from being really fringe to mainstream over time, often through persistent advocacy and changing societal attitudes. Because the next thing I'm going to talk about is supporting landholder access to some of these coexistence solutions for beavers, because this is prioritized under the new law. But if it poses an undue burden on some people who may already not have a positive opinion of beavers, it's really less likely to yield some of those positive impacts that are touted in the language of the Beaver Believer Bill. And so Think Wild's BeaverWorks program works to advance natural beaver population recovery through three main aims, one being outreach, one being habitat restoration,
And the other being landholder support services. So technical services for people that basically want to try coexistence with beaver. And so I'll walk through kind of what some of those solutions could look like. They are really cost effective and humane. And they're usually made out of things that you can find at like Wilco or Coastal. So they're really, I'll demystify them here. But first, we have to remember beavers have these giant honking teeth that grow throughout their entire life. They take down a lot of wood to build ponds and to eat. And so, beavers, this can cause a lot of problems for landholders and for roads. It creates a lot of secondary issues with septic fields and, taking down power lines. And so finding solutions that work are really crucial to help us see some of those fire-based benefits. And so what can we do to live peacefully with beavers? Well, first I want to talk about preventative things like fencing trees that you don't want beavers to take down. You can put fencing around them and then they can't get to them. Another solution, if you don't like the aesthetic of fencing or if you just have a lot of property and it would be cost prohibitive, is camouflage painting your trees. If you mix latex paint and sand, and paint your trees, beavers really do not like the feeling on their teeth. If you paint it up to 4 feet, so 2 feet above the snow line, you can camouflage it really well to your tree, probably better than in this example, and it will last for a few years. So just recommend that you mark your calendars when you painted it, because if you did a great job camouflaging, you might forget. Another interesting reason for the conflicts we have with beavers is that beavers will sometimes look for the narrowest part in a stream where they can make a pond and build a dam. And so sometimes when they see a culvert under a road, they're like, ooh, perfect, I'll start here. And so that, of course, causes conflict for us because, we don't want our infrastructure getting damaged. And so this kind of method with a half-moon fence and 2 pipes through it can make it so that way beavers will continue to dam on that fence, but they won't obstruct the flow through the culvert. So this is a good option if you are okay with beavers staying in the area, but you just don't want road damage or damaging whatever the culvert is under. And so here's just a use case of this from a colleague in Northwest Oregon. A farmer was really excited to have some of this riparian habitat return with the beavers, but they didn't like the way it was blocking their culvert and flooding one of the fields that they used. So they tried this coexistence solution, and they were really happy. It was a win-win. They got to keep some of this improved habitat, enjoy the wildlife that were sticking around, and not have any damage to their income-generating field. Another good example is this trapezoid fence. So this is a good option if you want beavers to really move on from a culvert, because the reason that beavers were attracted is, of course, that it was a really narrow point. And so now that you've multiplied the amount of space that they would have to dam against with this oddly shaped contraption, they would be damming perpendicular to the flow of water. It's really kind of against their instincts, and so they will get really tired. They're like, this work is really not adding up like I thought it would, and they will move on. And for all of these solutions, if this is on a fish-bearing stream in Oregon, you do need to get fish passage approval, but of course, because the state is promoting this, it's getting a lot easier to get permits for these in-stream solutions. Let's see. There was a video, I don't know if it will play, sorry we're having issues with the videos, but in Lake County, there was an example of this where a farmer had a beaver clog up the point of diversion. It was causing issues with the downstream water rights user, and a bunch of high school kids came out and came up with a solution, which was the trapezoid fence and installing a beaver dam analog, so basically building a new dam that the beaver might be attracted to and move on from the point of diversion. So again, another win-win made out of just farm supply stores, and it took a day's work. The last example I'll go through is independent of any human infrastructure, but it's a really cool design. So this pond leveler, basically it's this giant straw in the middle of a pond, and the height of the pipe over the dam determines the depth of the water. So when you put this pipe in, you're basically choosing how much ponded water you find acceptable. You put it at 3 feet,
if the beaver continues adding on to that pond leveler, so here's an example from the city of Tualatin, which is in Portland area. If they were to trap beavers and remove dams, it would be many people's full-time job. And so they chose a coexistence solution to make sure that this ponding water wasn't touching the bottom of that bridge, causing a risk to humans, damaging infrastructure. And so this is the day that it was installed, and then you can see on the right, the beavers have stuck around. They've added more material to the top of the pond leveler, but it's not touching the bottom of the bridge, and there's some ducks in the picture, so it's still functioning as a pond. And so a lot of these solutions, offer ecological benefits, but they are also really financial benefits. And so a lot of county roads departments and maintenance crews have looked at how much they've saved, and it's usually like 5 to 10 times over when they switch from trapping and removing beavers to using coexistence solutions. Because of course, your first thought might be that trapping and removing a beaver is a direct solution to your problems, but really it's, treating a symptom. Because if your property is attracting a beaver now, it's going to attract a new beaver next year and a new beaver next year. And so these bar charts on the right really show up to that. So the blue is trapping and the orange is flow devices. And so in the first year, if trapping is, your go-to solution, if it's more cost, if it's a lower cost, you can see how that would be an easy choice. But then as you kind of look across these years, you can see that choosing a coexistence solution really holds up over time as just the more effective solution. And so at this point, I really just want us to consider the spatial variability in these costs and benefits of living with wildlife. Because urban supporters of coexistence policies may not experience the same direct impacts as rural people or agricultural communities who often already hold less favorable views of beavers due to things like the property damage, the flooding, and the unpredictability. Because the concerns about beavers being destructive are, of course, valid. And so it really does take relinquishing some control over the landscape for people to choose these solutions. And so last year, a bill was proposed that would make some of these tools more available to landholders, so the things that we just kind of walked through, the tree protection, the pond levelers, and it really would build capacity to meet some of these lofty aims in the Beaver Believer bill. And it was passed, but it didn't receive any funding, and since it is a funding package, effectively just doesn't exist. And so this year, effectively, an identical bill was proposed. It was heard by the legislator in February, and again, it would just help overcome these hurdles by establishing a fund to assist landholders with implementing these coexistence solutions. And so it was passed unanimously by the House. It's been referred to the Ways and Means Committee, and we should know basically how the rubber is going to meet the road by the end of the month. So, cross your fingers, it's an exciting time. But with or without this funding, BeaverWorks gets grants specifically to defray the cost of choosing these coexistence solutions. The Beaver Institute, which is sort of the national training organization for all of these coexistence solutions, offers grants that cover 1/3 of the total project cost. So really there are a lot of resources available. I just want to make more people know about them to make this actually an option for beavers and human beaver coexistence moving forward. We have a lot of resources on the BeaverWorks website. The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife has a Living with the Beavers pamphlet or PDF. And there's a lot of other organizations that have really cool flow charts and schematics if this is something that people want to do themselves or understand a little bit better. And so again, this is a really exciting time, a shifting tides in the way we treat beavers and the way we relate to beavers. And there is an exciting bill, HB 3932, the Beavers and Water Quality Bill, that is up for decision right now. And so it would effectively close beaver trapping on public lands within certain watersheds that meet certain qualities. And what that qualities mean is it's waters that are EPA, I think it's like, whatever, grade 4 and 5, which is impaired water quality. And nearly a third of Oregon stream miles are impaired, and this is even more meaningful when you realize only 46% of our stream miles have been assessed. And so this just means that, we learned so much already during this slideshow, and there's so much research out there about the potential of beavers to improve water quality. And so this was passed by the House Committee on Climate, Energy, and the Environment, and just yesterday it was passed by the House, and it's on to the Senate. I'm so glad you clapped. I'm really thrilled. And so this was like a pretty contentious bill. It attracted over 1,000 letters of testimony, around 300 in opposition and 700 in support. It's noted as having minimal fiscal impact, so it won't cost taxpayers anything, but of course it has a potential to offer significant benefits to us, because Category 1 EPA waters are waters that you can fish in, drink from, and swim in, which is like, wouldn't it be nice if all water was like that? And so this potentially could get us a little bit closer to that. And so what it would do is require the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife to list waterways that don't meet these water quality standards and that are closed to trapping, and then update that every 2 years. So this also would be a really exciting way to see, like, if at a large scale beavers are improving water quality, because a lot of these studies are from really small areas, and now we could potentially be doing it across Oregon, which is just really rare. So outside of this, exciting legal space, there are still a variety of factors that limit beaver population success in Oregon, including suitable habitat, resource availability, and public perception. So beaver populations throughout the landscape have rebounded from, their lowest point, but they have remained generally low for some of these reasons. And so, for those reasons, BeaverWorks works to advance natural beaver population recoveries with these 3 primary focal areas that I already mentioned. But I do want to talk about our habitat restoration, because we really are able to have such a huge impact on the landscapes and the communities of Oregon, because all of our projects are volunteer powered. And so we have a really big planting coming up in Otriko National Forest, so that's our first big fieldwork project for the year. It'll be next month, and we're planting 4,000 willows in an area that already had beaver dam analogs installed recently. And so they're creating this like wetted riparian area, they're holding water, and this really could just be a great like cherry on top way to make this area more suitable for beavers to stick around. This fall, we're going to start a structured citizen science beaver monitoring program. So we will be in Malheur National Forest, walking up streams, looking for beaver sign. I'm really excited to spend an entire month outside. And this really is impactful because there are so many data gaps about beaver habitat use, beaver population size. They've really just started to be treated as a wildlife species in the last year. And so this is just a really exciting way for us to address that data gap, inform restoration activities, and we're synchronized with other state land managers, and so this will really inform beaver conservation statewide, and especially to collect more data from the east side, where a lot of this data population studies come from the west side of the state, where there's more people, there's more beavers, there's more capacity. This will really expand capacity for us to learn more about, public lands on the east side, where there certainly isn't a ton of capacity for the folks in the Malheur to do it. So I'm just really excited about that. If you are looking for something a little bit closer to home, we host a Beaver Book Club every month, so the first Wednesday of every month. We read primary scientific literature about beavers, relating to beavers' impact on the environment, beaver biology. Scientific writing can be very dry and impenetrable, but reading it together is a really great way to get more out of it, to break through. And yeah, I would love to see you there.
So, oh my gosh, it's working. Wait. So we have so much more. If you want to check out the BeaverWorks website, we are spending a couple of weeks in Deschutes National Forest in Lower Black Butte Swamp, so that's really just right near here, to again add on to some existing restoration efforts they've made, and to just spend a couple of weeks LARPing as beavers, playing in the stream. We have a week in May and a week in July planned, and you can see some of our upcoming events too, if you're not interested in volunteering. We have a bird walk at Lake Creek Lodge coming up on World Migratory Bird Day. And so with the collective power of so many passionate people, we really are able to have an outsized footprint. And I'd love to see some of you all there. And yeah, in the spirit of these Frontiers in Science lecture series, I would love to hear from you on what opportunities you see in the horizon. And today is the 55th anniversary of the first Earth Day, which of course aimed to raise public awareness about environmental issues and led to the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency. So it's a really perfect day to share these exciting updates about beavers and the potential of multi-species uplift in Oregon. So thank you so much for your time and attention.
We have time for a few questions. And I need to ask the first one. Do the prospects for beavers excite you at all? No. Just referring to that, they were very enthusiastic about the so questions.
Hey, David, use the microphone for questions. We can't hear you.
Now can you hear me?
Yeah.
Dr. Thompson, thank you for this wonderful presentation. When I heard you mention various watersheds, waterways in Oregon, I didn't hear you say anything about Whitechiefs Creek. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little to that, particularly wondering if down in the canyon where all that work has been done, if there's a population there.
Okay, yes, I would love to. I feel like there might be other people in this room who actually have more up-to-date information from Whitechiefs Creek, but I do know that they shared that they were really excited that after all of this restoration work, they did have evidence of beavers returning, which is, the gold standard. You can never control them, they're autonomous, but they were really excited to have beavers come back. And with this new beaver sign monitoring program, they also are really excited to potentially implement that there to again see if there's a way to better connect what restoration actions are related to supporting beaver populations.
Thank you.
A lot of Oregon land is federal land, and these new rules and approaches apply to BLM land, national forest land.
Oh, like the water closures?
And just encouraging beavers versus they eliminate these BLM land for some reason.
Oh yeah, good question. So for example, for the coexistence solutions, that is really loosely written. There's no citizens arrest policy for not choosing a coexistence solution with beavers. And so there isn't, in the language of the law, an established threshold to say we proved that we tried using this. And so it is on paper plan B. I think with this funding package, it will really make a difference between people actually choosing it and even knowing about this new law. But it is mostly the coexistence solutions are for private landholders. So that's a really good question.
Right here.
You mentioned something going on at Black Beaver Ranch. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Oh yeah, so at Lower Black Butte Swamp, the Forest Service has already done a lot of restoration to hold water and make this habitat more suitable, and they really would love to have beavers return to this site. And beaver dam analogs are something that humans do as sort of this low-tech way to sort of mimic the potential or what beavers would do if they lived there. But the thing that's different is that beavers work every day,
And, this is something that we will do one year and then it's just out there in the elements, for season after season. And so they do take some maintenance. So basically we're maintaining these beaver dam analogs that have already been installed. And in addition to that, doing some outreach in the area to address that human tolerance element that may be limiting beavers getting to this site.
So they're busy as a beaver.
Exactly, they got the name for a reason.
Sure, Richard.
Nutrients share the same environment as beavers. I don't know if there are many around here, there's lots in the Willamette Valley, but do they interact?
Yes, they do share a lot of the same habitat, and not here though. That's kind of an interesting thing. We don't have nutria right around here, but nutria definitely benefit from beaver-modified habitat, as do otters. They kind of follow beavers where they go because they make things better. And it seems like the beavers tolerate them. There's no benefit to the beavers of nutria and otter being around per se, but they're very tolerant.
How is Oregon compared to other western states supporting beaver populations?
Well, that's what's so interesting is that, we haven't been managing them as a wildlife species, so it's really hard to know. I know Washington State is ahead of us on a couple of things, trying to understand beavers using eDNA, so that's like water sampling to understand where beavers occur throughout Washington, which is pretty cool, because you can't learn anything about like the size of the population, but it's more like a beavers yes, no within this watershed. And so California didn't even recognize beavers as a native species until I think something like 5 years ago. And so yeah, it's really like a lot of states are starting to turn, realizing that they could really be a huge asset in achieving all of these things that we really need to achieve because all of these climate impacts are really starting to stack up. So there isn't a clear winner, I guess.
How does Canada compare?
Canada, ooh, good question. I don't know. I don't know how they compare. It seems like it's kind of patchy there too in terms of support for beaver. There's certainly less people, so there's less conflict. More, places where beavers can just be beavers. But I don't know. Good question.
So, in terms of climate change and beavers, it seems like they're all over the landscape, globally. So they can pretty much survive everywhere. It seems like if there's water, right? So is that true? And then do they help mitigate the impact of climate change? There are two questions.
Well, they actually are amplifying the impacts of climate change by moving into new places where the permafrost is melting in Alaska. And so beaver range is actually expanding north. So that is like a really unique, case. But it is, just interesting that, their range is malleable. It depends on where there's water. And now in places where there's water for more of the year, beavers are living. But they mitigate the effects of climate change in so many of the ways that we talked about with the carbon storage, with creating these fire breaks, so things that are just really influence the carbon cycle in those two ways. Holding water in streams late into the season, that's like a really big issue in a lot of arid places and a lot of the West. They do so much good, to mitigate the impacts of climate change. And now it's starting to really be recognized even in Oregon law.
Tell us about beavers in the country of Australia.
Absent. They like a lot of animals a lot of fur bearers, they were introduced to Patagonia because people were like, oh, let's just start a fur farm down here. So in places where they didn't co-evolve with the species, they can have like massive, dramatic, negative impacts, but I have thought about it for Australia. I don't know if anyone's tried, so if anyone's going on a trip, you can let me know if you see any beaver invasions.
Can you compare the impact on the environment of the wolf reintroduction in Yellowstone to the beaver and its impact on the environment?
You should come to the Beaver Den Book Club. We have readings specific to this sort of, is it the beaver, is it the wolf, like literature world. So there's a lot to unpack there. They're both keystone species. They both have huge impacts. They're both, not welcome everywhere. So their stories are really, intertwined. But I feel like I don't have a short answer, but it's a lot to unpack and we should do it sometime.
You have
you're obviously pretty excited about beavers. Does the current administration cause anxiety and your enthusiasm as you move forward?
No, I mean, honestly, like that Overton window, I brought it up because it's personally meaningful to me. Like, obviously, there's so much bad news in the world and in ecology. You know, there's so many species that are declining, they're on the brink. You know, monarchs were just like this common species that now are threatened just within my lifetime. They've almost gone, you know, invisible, but there's also so much good, like, and just like beavers, you know, they just keep working at things, you know, so just like one day at a time. And yeah, you know, I shared this stuff about Oregon law changes because of course, yeah, there's always horrible news, but there's also a lot of hope in some of these things.
Saying that relocating beavers is but do you have any examples of some success stories in relocation and maybe recreating a riparian zone that you want to reestablish on stream?
Yeah, so I guess like I cut my eye teeth in beaver world in Eastern Washington, where they basically proposed this like bazillion-dollar project that was going to build a bunch of human dams to hold on to late season water. And then a bunch of small nonprofits were like, how about a $200,000 grant for us to reintroduce beavers into some of these like federally managed watersheds, and then see if that actually has some of the same impacts you want, which is late season water. And so that's, you know, Eastern Washington doesn't have a ton of people, so there's less conflict, and so there's more places where if the beaver dispersed, you know, 50 miles from where it was dropped off, it wouldn't necessarily cause conflict. And so part of my job there was monitoring beaver-managed habitat after they settled somewhere. And so, you know, you can't necessarily measure a place before you drop the beavers off and after, because you'll be measuring two very different places. But they do have success, and a lot of other states are looking at, you know, ways to improve their efficacy of like taking families, you know, what time of year, what are the site characteristics that do lead to success, and that way it's not as, you're killing as many beavers in the process, and you're having more success. So people really are refining the process. And that Frank Church Wilderness example from the Operation Beaver Drop, a lot of beavers did survive there, and there still are a ton of beavers in this area where they previously had been extirpated, so that's a success story.
Have time for one more, anybody? All right. Oh wait, over here, Brad.
So you talk about how we man-made dams on the lower side of flat refuge. And we talk about beavers starting to take 50 miles. So you build these dams, and we know we have short feet, they don't like walking across. How do the beavers get to this new habitat?
Well, they will travel through the water. You know, if they encounter other beavers or some hostility, they'll move to overland travel, but they'll just travel through water, you know, like major rivers, they'll travel through the Deschutes River. At the coast, they travel along the ocean and try out new rivers from the ocean when they're dispersing. So yeah, they keep traveling until they find somewhere that they think is, you know, a good starter home. And so sometimes with these beaver dam analogs, that's the hope, is that beavers will show up and they'll be like, nice try, but you know, I think I can take it from here. And there are a lot of success stories, one being Bridge Creek in Eastern Oregon. That is, you know, just like a really parched Eastern Oregon stream that got a lot of attention from this like beaver dam analogs and low-tech process-based restoration. And then beavers have moved into a lot of the reaches where they did the restoration, and a lot of reaches where they didn't do any restoration, because now they're just in the area.
I've got a fun question here for you. There are beavers in some museums or high desert museums and so on and so forth. Do beavers ever establish relationship with people?
Oh my gosh, yes. We just celebrated International Beaver Day, or I did anyway. And Dorothy
Richards was this like beaver advocate and just obsessed with beavers. She lived in the Adirondacks in the 1930s, and she got the state of New York to agree to reintroduce beavers to her property. And she just let them, like, she created a pond in her basement. I think she basically devoted her whole house to beavers. And I just finished reading her book, and she just talks about so much, you know, like any animal that you get to know. If it chooses to trust you, it feels really special. You learn about every individual's idiosyncrasies and the way, you know, the dynamics change when new family members come and go. And yeah, if you want to read Beaver Sprite by Dorothy Richards, you can just read 200 pages of, you know, human-beaver interactions.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson.
Anybody who has the time and ability to make like a beaver and help us with the chairs, that'd be awesome. Don't chew them. It's something I should have said. If you can't make it Sunday, but if you want to help Sisters School, Science and Sisters School, go on this science stuff.